Chico and the Man will not be presented this evening, and the Rockford Files will be seen 1 hour later than normal, so that we may bring you the following special program.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon Live, the comic book conversation show and pop culture show, as we expand our horizons with tonight's subject. John Suntress here. I am happy to welcome one of the preeminent Beatle historians in the Midwest. It's Professor Moptop. Professor, it's great to see you, man.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, John.
Hey, my pleasure. I've enjoyed your reports over the years at Chicago's own WXRT, my old stomping grounds on Breakfast with the Beatles. And the stars aligned. It suddenly occurred to me, because we've got mutual friends, that, hey, I should have Professor Moptop on to talk about the Disney Plus Get Back with the Beatles, Peter Jackson's amazing miniseries that dropped this holiday weekend. And I know a good chunk of the world probably has already seen it, and I'm not as worried about spoilers. It's 50 years, as you told me on the phone as we were setting this up. I don't know how to break it to you, but they break up at the end.
Yeah, just so you know, if you don't know that Fredo gets it in the end, it's past that.
I understand. Well,
more importantly, when are they going to make the Booster Gold movie?
Attaboy, that's what I want to hear. Oh, Moptop, that's so great that you're a Booster Gold fan.
When we come back for Comic World, I will be glad to talk about the Booster Gold movie. Which
are you going to go? We're both in Chicago. Are you going to go to C2E2, the big Chicago convention, in a couple weeks?
Maybe. We'll find out.
I understand. Dan Jurgens, co-creator of Booster Gold, good friend of mine. Very good friend of mine.
Is that right?
Absolutely. So I'll let him know that you enjoyed his work and everything.
Tell him I want the movie and I want to see Skeets.
Everybody wants to see Skeets. Absolutely, man. That's fantastic. You see, you know your stuff, man. Well, I hope to impress you with my amateur Beatles knowledge. Prior to the series running, did you go back and watch Let It Be, the original movie?
You know what, about I guess it was at the beginning of 2020 was when they first said that there's going to be this new Peter Jackson documentary. And around that time, I rewatched the Let It Be movie. And I hadn't seen it in a while, and it's very good. It's enjoyable, albeit a little bit depressing. It's a little bit, it's a little bit low. It's a little bit down because you know what's going to happen. They kept saying how the new documentary was going to show much more of the positive side of it all, and they did, and they showed that it wasn't just misery and pain the whole time. But like I said before, ultimately we know how it's going to end.
Well, and wasn't it interesting, or I guess maybe it wasn't interesting, and maybe this was on the nose. I love the fact that Jackson started with that first shot of the face of the bass drum and everything, and I'm like,
Yes,
oh,
that
that's
was
great.
very good.
And
Yes.
it was so great to see. It's like, oh my God, this is so much cleaner looking, and the fact that they were able to clean the video up a lot. I know, and I'm sure you know that. Originally, Let It Be was shot in 16 millimeter, thinking it would have been a television special, and they make that very clear in the Peter Jackson version. But because of that, when they blew it up to 35 millimeters and we saw it in theaters, it was very grainy. The first time I saw Let It Be, I don't know, Moptop, if you grew up here in Chicago, but remember the Varsity Theater in Evanston?
I know of it.
Okay. That they used to, that was a revival house in Evanston, right by Northwestern. That's the first place that I saw Let It Be. Where's the first place you saw it?
I saw it on a Betamax videotape, which was transferred from a Laserdisc, and I bought it at a bootleg show.
Sure.
So that was not high level quality. So seeing this Peter Jackson version was just phenomenal the way it looked. They also did some amazing work with the audio of it as well, because I don't know if you've ever heard any of the bootlegs, but they're really poor quality, and there's a lot of everything going on. Sometimes they're having a conversation, and you could hear guitars tuning, and you could hear people moving stuff around, and they were able to separate all of that so they can get rid of either the chit chat or the guitar or something like that.
Yeah, that was interesting to learn. I forget what the AI software is called.
I think it somehow was referred to as HAL, like 2001.
Something like that.
Peter
yeah.
Jackson and his crew were calling it Mal because of Mal Evans. We'll talk about him in a bit.
That's excellent, man. Man, it is so great to see the periphery support people of the Beatles organization, like Mal, like Neil Aspel, and Derek Taylor, and so many of these other people. And yeah, I had no idea about poor Mal's tragic end.
That's a very sad ending.
Yeah.
I always say that Mal Evans has the best seat in the history of the world. He was friends with the Beatles when they were just starting at the Cavern Club. As soon as they started to get a little bit more popular, he got a little bit more responsibility. They gave him a job when they started touring. He would drive, and he was with them all the way into the end and beyond. Sadly, in the early 70s, he moved to California, and he had some mental illnesses, and there was at one point he had an air rifle, and he was threatening to kill himself, and the police thought that they were going to kill him, and they wound up shooting and killing him.
Yeah.
Now, apparently he wrote an autobiography of his tales and his personal effects that were supposed to be mailed back to England, including his ashes and this autobiography, have never shown up anywhere. They're somewhere in the world, or burnt or destroyed, or no one really knows. I always hope that one day those get discovered.
I'm so with you. Absolutely. Prior to this, and maybe this isn't your favorite Beatle documentary now that we've seen it. What is your favorite Beatle documentary aside from this? And then how does this stack up with the other Beatle documentaries?
Does Help count as a documentary?
Oh, that's hilarious. I would say no because it's highly fictionalized. But
I thought the Beatles anthology was just fantastic when they released that in 1995. I thought that all of them were very honest about it in terms of maybe I didn't act the best way I could have at this point. Maybe I should have been nicer about this, or I don't remember, or it's confusing and I'm not sure if this happened this way, or the one part when they're talking about the second time they went to Shea Stadium in New York. And George says, well, I don't remember going there twice. I enjoyed that. I thought that was much better than this was. And this was very good. But I think a lot of the reason the Get Back thing is so cool is because so many people have seen so little of this. And it's very brand new. Even if you've read about it, even if you've seen a little bit of the Let It Be movie or the Let It Be movie in its entirety, it's brand new for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And also, chronologically, they released Let It Be after the breakup, after Abbey Road. And as we know, this was all made prior to them making Abbey Road. And I think, and forgive me, the original Let It Be's filmmaker's name, Michael something Hogg, right?
Michael Lindsay-Hogg.
Michael Lindsay-Hogg. reputedly the son of Orson Welles, which cracks me up.
Uh-huh.
And but I think Hogg in his presentation leaned into the breakup, obviously, with a lot of the editorial choices he made with the footage.
He
And
also had a lot of limitations. He wasn't allowed to show George quitting. He wasn't supposed to show them arguing. Apparently, one of the things that were okay was smoking cigarettes. Because
that's interesting.
Constantly.
Yeah, but Professor, I'll be honest. When Disney Plus and maybe it's Jackson himself has the disclaimer, "Hey, warning, everybody smoking." It's
adult themes, language, and smoking.
Yeah, it's like I know, and believe me, I'm not a smoker. I respect that, but also I'm like, all right, it was 50 years ago. I mean, they don't put those kind of disclaimers on classic Hollywood when Humphrey Bogart and everybody's smoking like chimneys.
I also noticed that they were drinking quite a bit and pouring drinks for one another. And I was wondering, you don't really see that in the original movie. I was wondering if that was another limitation that he had. So Michael Lindsay-Hogg basically had, 50 hours of film to use, but he couldn't do this and he couldn't do that. And he had a lot of limitations, which was exactly why it turned into the negative as it was. Apparently, there was also a cut of that in which there was another 30 minutes of John and Yoko. And after the original screening, several people said we need less John and Yoko in the film because it was unbalanced. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. I
think in hindsight, Hogg did a pretty good job with what he had to do.
I am so with you. And also, I love it is so fascinating, not only watching this, but also watching the reaction from diehard Beatle fans and also newbies. And Hogg is really like pegged as a villain. And like, who does this guy think he is? And it's like, look, he just made the All You Need Is Love video. And it's coming into... Go ahead.
He directed the Stones Rock and Roll Circus too.
Right, absolutely.
So he had a resume. He knew how to deal with these big stars.
Well, but also had just directly made All You Need Is Love. So I'm sure coming into this project, okay, I'm the film guy. This is the band, but I'm the film guy. I am collaborating with the Beatles. So yeah, I mean, I find the reaction to what they say almost as his, insertion, and it's like, what do you expect? And also, man, I love at Twickenham the indecision where we start in the movie and where we finish. I think it's so interesting because they really did kind of seem, as they were just figuring things out and what they were going to do, kind of directionless. And it really wasn't until they were at Abbey Road that they felt comfortable. And then George Martin seemed to be there more. And thankfully, you just see how I think important George Martin is to the equation of, okay, guys, time to get to work. Let's go. We're going this way, and being very decisive. And so yeah, what do you think of those initial impressions?
Well, one of the things that I don't think that Peter Jackson described very well is that it was very early in the morning at 9-10 o'clock. This is because this is when the union film and light people, when they had to work. Well, the Beatles were used to starting at 4 p.m, working till the sun comes up, sleeping all day. So this was really hard for them to adjust. Also inside Twickenham Studios, it was extremely cold. As you can see, they're bundled up and, they're just shivering cold a lot of times. So early in the morning, a bunch of people watching in a cold studio that's away from home. It wasn't the best place for them to really get inspired to make great music. That was hard. They also didn't really have a plan. They had kind of a vague plan. We'll write some songs. Maybe we'll do a show. Maybe we'll do a TV show. Maybe we'll play live somewhere. Some of the ideas of where they were going to play were crazy. I think the ship idea would have been interesting.
Sure.
But I think they were smart on a lot of these to say, nah, that's probably not the best idea. Not as plausible or logical as we could have been.
Can you imagine that kind of contest of not only win a chance to see the Beatles, but like join them on a ship and like a Beatle cruise, basically?
Oh, man.
That's hilarious.
Else. That would have been another thing that the Beatles would be way ahead of their times.
I also love them reading the coverage of the band and just kind of shaking their heads and laughing at, oh yeah, these guys are all at odds. And again, that's what Jackson pointed out, is because of the original cut of Let It Be, I think a lot of us were led to believe that, okay, this is near the end. And it's like, no, it isn't. And I mean, it kind of is, but also, other than George getting frustrated as he does, no, this is like business as usual. And while they don't have Brian anymore, Paul is trying to be that leader that he knows they need, but the rest of them are still kind of acting like it's still the four of them, as they should. And yeah, I'm kind of glad that there is as much humor in the Peter Jackson cut than there was in the Let It Be.
It is nice to see that it wasn't all business and misery, and that they actually did have some enjoyment throughout this. And the album itself, ultimately, the Let It Be album, was a little bit more down than some of the other Beatle albums. There's, Let It Be and Long and Winding Road specifically are very sad songs,
Yeah.
I find it very interesting to see how many of the Abbey Road songs were already around that early.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we got a sense of that when we first saw Let It Be as well. I also loved how many songs ended up being solo songs for George and John, especially like right off the bat in the first chapter. I'm hoping you'll remember the name of it, but we get Lennon's Jealous Guy in its earlier stages.
I don't know what it's Child of Nature.
Yes.
Now that was actually written all the way back in India. And the reason they demoed it when they got back from India for the White Album, but the reason they didn't pursue it further is because of Mother Nature's Son. And they figured they didn't need 2 slow acoustic songs about nature on the double album.
I see.
John remembered the tune, thought about it during Let It Be, but didn't turn it into Jealous Guy until solo. I enjoyed the Give Me Some Truth when they were trying to figure that out. It's a shame that they didn't pursue some of these ideas more at the time. Teddy Boy is another one, which wound up on the McCartney album.
Yep.
And throughout the sessions, George had Let It Down. He had All Things Must Pass. He had quite a few songs that wound up on All Things Must Pass. And, well, sadly, they were a bit dismissive of him.
Yes, and that is the other big thing that I think comes from this Jackson version, is the fact that it's still high school as far as the four of them are concerned. John and Paul are really at the top, and George is trying really hard. And
George is trying really hard, but something to keep in mind too at this point, George's greatest achievement with the Beatles is probably While My Guitar Gently Weeps. We haven't seen Here Comes the Sun and Something at this point.
Right.
So, and whereas we have seen back in the USSR, we've seen Dear Prudence, Hey Jude, Revolution, and so on, so on, and so on. So John and Paul weren't completely wrong to give their own songs a little bit more time. They definitely should have given George more consideration. And of course, hindsight is the easiest thing on the planet. Should have done this, should have done that.
Again, I think Jackson, and listen, every documentarian manipulates footage and sound to fit their own narrative. But do you think Jackson is accurate because George maybe has these ideas brewing, they are dismissive, plus Twickenham isn't really the greatest environment. Hogg is making these suggestions that clearly even the band, as polite as they are like, yeah, no, I don't know. And George is like, look, this is a mess. And you're not listening to me and what I want to contribute. I'm out of here.
Now, the year before, George had spent some time in Woodstock, New York with Bob Dylan and the band.
Yeah.
And this is when Dylan is building George up, telling him, your songs are just as good as John and Paul's. You should be getting singles. You should be getting more than 2 songs an album. So he really had a lot of confidence going in. And as soon as he came in, they deflated him pretty quickly. And obviously he didn't enjoy that. I was surprised at how many people didn't realize that George had up and quit at one point. Sometimes when you've read so many books, it's hard to know what's common, what everyone knows, what some people know.
Sure.
It's a little bit difficult to know in terms of who is a hardcore fan and who is, a lesser, more casual fan.
Would you, in mentioning the books and stuff like that, what would you say are the best reference books for people who watch this and would like to go back to the beginning and really, kind of learn everything.
You should go with Textbook Beatles, which is my book.
Absolutely. Very good.
Go to Amazon or to ProfessorMoptop.com. It's really hard to say because there are so many books. Mark Lewinson's Complete Recording Sessions, I feel, is the standard, because even though it doesn't really get into the nuts and bolts of then they toured here and this happened then, and it doesn't have so much of the history of it, it has all the music and specifically what they did on which days and who came up with this idea and what George Martin said, maybe we should do this and then start over. I think that's the best way to start. Mark Lewinson also has the, I forget the title of it. It's the first of 3 parts, and the second 2 parts haven't been released yet. Not on the air, whatever it's called. It's from day one of the Beatles, and the first 400 pages of the book is before Ringo even joins.
Yes, and that's the one that
detailed.
Yes, that's the one that I've most recently read, and that's terrific because I think it puts a lot. Well, it really describes their immediate world and what they were being exposed to in those very early days, and that's very, very exciting to read. And I mean, I loved them as teenagers, seeing Bill Haley and some of the other acts that they saw, again, while they were still kids and everything. Hey, Laura Marin wants to point out that not only do you have Textbook Beatles Volume 1, but also Volume 2.
She is absolutely correct.
Excellent, man. Yeah, give people a sample of what they can find in Textbook Beatles.
Well, Textbook Beatles Volume 1 and 2 starts from the very, very beginning of time. The first one is from the most important day of the world ever, which was when John and Paul first met. Ivan Vaughn is the name of the guy who holds the title of being the most important human being in the planet ever, because he said, "Hey, John, this is my friend Paul. Paul, John." The first volume goes until the end of 1962, and then Volume 2 covers 63 and 64. And when you read 63 and 64, you realize just how hard the band worked. They scarcely had much time off at all. There were some times they were touring, and then they would do a recording studio session in the morning, and then they would play a show at night, and sometimes they would do 2-3 shows a day. They would play during lunchtime at the Cavern Club. They certainly worked very, very hard to get to where they were, and I think that puts it in a nice perspective. If you go to ProfessorMoptop.com or go to Professor Moptop on Facebook, you can follow all the links there. I'll mail them out soon. One size fits all, just in time for Christmas.
Attaboy, that's good to hear. And truly, I think coming off a Get Back, great opportunity to check out your textbooks, definitely. Mentioning the Cavern Club, I love that footage of them in the sweater vests and them singing Some Other Guy at the Cavern Club. So much great energy right there.
It looks fun. You could see that there's a certain something between the 4 of them and the fans, and it's just pretty remarkable. Like I had said about the anthology documentary before, there's just so many cool things about it, and that obviously covers the entire span of their career, whereas this one's much more focused. I'm curious in the future what the next Beatle documentary of this caliber is going to be, because I'm positive this isn't the last one.
Fair enough. Well, yeah, you're right. And also, I like the fact that we didn't get Paul and Ringo today in contrast to what they were doing in 69. I really do like that it's a purely 1969 1-month product, that month of January.
I like that as well, because like I had said before too, they have different viewpoints when they're in their 20s as opposed to when they're in their 70s. 50 years of hindsight, things change. I was glad about that too, that it was strictly back then.
Understood. Continue.
I was reading about Dick James here.
Yes, Alfredo is watching backstage, as are a couple other people. I didn't know if that was your that you shared the link, because that was meant to just be the streaming link. But I don't mind the audience. This is like them watching a concert, and they're behind the stage watching us and everything, and that's okay. But yeah, Alfredo says, I'd like to add that my most interesting point in the documentary was when Dick James was getting their signatures, and yeah, Paul was not happy. Was Dick James he's the music publisher,
I got the impression that Paul thought that this is our turf. Dick James shouldn't be peddling his business here. we'll go to your office and sign these papers. You stay out of our studio. That was just an impression that I got.
I understand.
I also noticed that Dick James was also smoking. Another thing that I was really surprised about was how much John Lennon thought that Alan Klein was spectacular.
Yes.
He kept going on and on about what an interesting and fascinating man was. He had also mentioned that they stayed up very late talking to him. And I was wondering if drugs were a factor. Because at this point in time, hindsight now, we know that John and Yoko were experimenting with heroin at this point in time.
Wow. Yeah.
Sometimes they were shooting up or doing their drugs in the morning. Later in the session, sometimes they didn't want to do anything because they wanted to be straight throughout the day, which caused different types of problems. I was wondering if Alan Klein might have indulged them to be able to spend some time with them to really try to get, into them.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, now in hindsight, it's like, I just met this guy, Lucifer. All he wants is our souls. I think it's a great deal. I think we really ought to consider it. And it's like, no, don't do it, man.
You could see that, and at first George seemed kind of like, oh, here's John again. And then as John started talking a little bit more, and Yoko was agreeing, he was kind of thinking, maybe they're right,
Well, and as John pointed out, hey, the Rolling Stones, Rock and Roll Circus, and look what they're doing. Not only the album, but they made the film, and they're making a book, and we're getting a much bigger cut of the music than we are, lads. And it's
Alan Klein knew how to make money.
Yeah. Well, and it's of course for himself, and of course the bitter irony, right? Isn't Klein the one that sued George Harrison for My Sweet Lord with "He's So Fine"?
That's correct. Yes. He also he didn't directly sue, but he had a hand in Chuck Berry, his publishing company, suing Lennon as well.
Right, for Come Together.
Correct. Yes, for You Can't Catch Me. There's a part in the Ruddles movie where they're talking about this one sues this one sues that one, this one sues that one, and in the confusion, Stig sued himself. That's very accurate.
And by the way, that is one of the great relationships is the Beatles and Monty Python, to the point too of George when they want to make wasn't it Holy Grail, and George is like, I'll pay for it. I want to see it. Or was it Life of Brian?
The Life of Brian, yeah. When there was religious elements of the Life of Brian, and when the main producer backer first heard about this, he said, well, we can't do this. And they were already halfway through the film, and Eric Idle mentioned that to George, and George said, well, I kind of want to see this. So yeah. Yeah, that's there's a very interesting marriage between George and the Monty Python people. He also produced the Lumberjack song.
What about the Lumberjack song? Tell me.
George produced it, the studio version of the Lumberjack song.
Wow, I had no...
Technically, George, oh, not him again, Harrison did.
That's fantastic. That's amazing, man.
This is how we get off the point. We see how easy it is for the Beatles to start getting off the point when they're trying to write new songs. It's that easy.
But again, I wonder, again, you are a Beatles historian, so clearly this is like, coming across King Tut's tomb as an archaeologist and like poring over every second. I, as an amateur fan, feel the same way. And also, one of the things I like to do with Word Balloon is discuss the creative process and see where the inspiration comes from. And that's what we get in this movie. I wonder how many, if not casual fans or curiosity seekers, really stuck with almost 8 hours of this and got tired of seeing them go over Across the Universe or Get Back or whatever all the many times to get the right song.
It is a lot to ask for someone who's not that interested in something, especially when there's not a whole lot of results until the end. It is interesting to note that when they get to the rooftop, that when they're playing on the rooftop, they're playing much better than they had throughout the entire month. Even after they've rehearsed these songs a lot, they still didn't quite have it until there was that instant moment of people would see that they weren't playing right. They needed that accountability. Even though not everyone can see them perfectly on the rooftop, they still knew that they had to play up to a certain level, which they really weren't up to that point.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think as just kind of classic old school live performers, it's like, all right, it's showtime, got to man up. Let's really make a serious effort. I'm on my Facebook page and I'm trying to read some comments that were made in anticipation of this conversation that we're doing, because some people had some interesting points. And Arlen Schumer says, and this, I want to hear what you think of this. Sorry, but I always thought the Rooftop concert was a colossal cop-out, ranking an audience F-offs next to Prince performing in Total Darkness a few years before he passed. Please, you're a great live band, Beatles. You haven't performed live in a couple of years, and you choose to go on a roof to perform, figuratively? Nobody, sorry, but listening to the street below when you can't even see them is doubly pathetic. The Beatles should have sucked it up and put their big boy pants on, maybe arrange a live TV show similar to what Elvis had done only a few months earlier, or I assume he means the 68 comeback special, or Truth to Tell performing in some 2,000 people in Libya actually makes more sense to me now. What do you think of that observation?
I think the Rooftop thing is just about as cool as it gets. I think that in 1969, 2.5 years after the Beatles had stopped performing live, that people should be happy to get anything that they get performing live from the Beatles. I think doing it like that, unannounced, and as we see it unfold, people aren't sure what's that noise. Is that them? Is that really going on? Is this really the Beatles? I think it's very cool. And it's also, it's a movie. They were trying to make a movie. And they wanted a big finish for a movie. And one of the coolest, most efficient things they could do is have their people drag all that heavy equipment up the stairs and play on the roof.
Absolutely.
I think it's super cool. I think I enjoyed seeing some of the, as Paul McCartney would call them, the old blue hairs on the street who were saying, oh, I kind of like it. And they sound very nice. Contrary, I was kind of surprised when there was that young kid who was kind of, Beatles haven't been good in a while. He was very dismissive of them, you know.
Yeah.
I thought it was very cool. What I would have liked to happen, and I think is exactly what Paul McCartney would have liked to have happened, he wanted to get arrested. He wanted to have the cops unplugging things and taking the bass away and handcuffing them, dragging them away.
Sure.
That might have been just a little bit cooler.
I'm with you. No, and also continue, please.
I just thought that would have been a really fun ending. And when you're at a point that you're the Beatles, if you get arrested and have to pay a £50,000 fine or whatever the money would be, that's chump change for them at this point. So,
yeah, absolutely. No, and I also remember again in Let It Be when one of the Bluers, I don't know why this is happening. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I love seeing that. It's totally unique. Yeah. And I don't really think that any other band in the world, especially at the time, could have pulled that off. I don't think the Stones could have pulled that off. I don't think, well, maybe the Who could have pulled that off, but maybe that's it. Yes.
I agree. And Dave and Laura are saying as well, Paul got his wish in Japan getting arrested, certainly. And Laura's right. The Rooftop thing is as cool as it gets. I completely agree with you, Laura. I found Arlen's comment interesting from a contrast standpoint. I didn't mind bringing it up.
I do know that some people don't think that it's as cool as it could have been. They should have performed in a regular, normal show, but they weren't a regular, normal band.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, Alfredo says that exact thing, that they weren't just a band. They really were this phenomenon. And I think that's why Hogg was suggesting these kind of grandiose ideas. And also, don't forget, they were coming off the White Album, which I think is a statement on its own. And that, I'm sure every band is like, all right, that was a big deal. Now we got to top ourselves. How do we do that?
They also didn't have any movies or television since the Mystery Tour. And that was at the end of 1967. And back then, taking a year off and not putting anything out, that could be detrimental to a band, as it was. Them not touring was a big deal, but they were able to sustain that. But they didn't know at the time,
It's so funny. Again, with retrospect, you learn that once they stopped touring, they would make these promotional films and send them off to various television platforms. And I'm even too young to remember those like flashes of moments. I really was aware of the Beatles the year they broke up. I mean, that is kind of when my awareness. I mean, I remember watching Yellow Submarine, the cartoon, as a kid, and also the Great Beatles. Well, it's funny. We Say Now Maybe, the great Beatles Saturday morning cartoon. It isn't that great. The animation is lousy, but of course the music absolutely carries those things.
And it's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun.
Which is ultimately the main goal we should have. I think a lot of people spend so much time analyzing the Beatles and overanalyzing the Beatles and discussing the Beatles and saying they should have done this and saying they should have done that and they did this, that they forget to just enjoy the music. Couple of other observations. One of my favorite things that I learned from this is that George had to sit on a pillow. In part one, he has that butt pillow that he's sitting on. I think that should be in like the Hard Rock Cafe somewhere. Also, at one point, Ringo opens up an envelope and he tapes something to the wall, which I think is a fan letter who someone drew a nice picture for Ringo. And he thought, well, this is nice. I'll tape this next to my drum riser and, look at it every now and then. I thought that was remarkable. I don't know why when I saw that, I backed it up. I tried to zoom in to see what it was. And,
sure.
Billy Preston, the big winner of the whole thing, of the whole weekend, is Billy Preston. Not only did his presence keep everyone from arguing as much as they could have. George Harrison in the anthology talks about how people aren't as bitchy when there's people around.
Yeah, when company comes to the house, absolutely.
Exactly, but he's extremely fun and he is an amazing player. I'm so impressed at how quickly he just fell in. He didn't have an ego, he wasn't nervous, and he's playing with the world's biggest band. He had already played with Little Richard by this point. He had already played with Ray Charles at this point. Jumping in with the Beatles was probably no big deal for him. He was just
and as far as he was concerned, he was coming over to be social. And then and I love these moments as well, when they're just screwing around and jamming. And he's like, yeah, all right, fine, no problem. And I also love John's joy. He should be in the band. And it's like, yeah, he should be in the band because
super quick about ready to
songs.
I also noticed again during that McCartney was maybe hang on just a bit, maybe he's only been here a couple days. Maybe it's not quite time to give him 20% of the pie,
Absolutely. That's Paul is fascinating because really he does go from leader, and it's like nobody's listening to Paul. Oh shoot! And then when George leaves, I mean, just the sorrow on Paul's face, which is genuine, and also, I mean, they all come off so much better, I think, than their reputations because we get to spend so much time watching them, and I think that's amazing.
Yeah, we get to see why Paul was trying so hard to keep them together. In the Let It Be film, he kind of looks like he's just being bossy. Another thing that I didn't quite realize was just how silent Ringo was through all of this. When I heard the bootleg tapes, I always assumed that because Ringo didn't have a singing mic, we didn't necessarily hear him speaking as much. But poor Ringo was just quiet and silent, and he looked very helpless and not knowing, what to say, what to do. He didn't want to ruffle feathers. He didn't want to,
But I also think, and my good friend Julie Benson, who's a TV writer, made this observation. Paul wanted to be the leader. John was really in Yoko land and really, and wasn't really getting involved until Abbey Road. George obviously wanted a much bigger role and was disappointed when he was getting his usual treatment. And Ringo was just riding the waves, man, and just fine, and did not bring any frustrations that might have happened in the studios with them at home, because every day he just seemed like, all right, I'm here, cool, let's go, here's a couple ideas, whatever.
You also see what a talented musician Ringo is, which is another thing that over the years people have, he's just the drummer, but you see just how quickly he falls into place, and you see as many of those takes that broke down, which in the movie we see a couple hundred. Throughout the month, there was probably thousands. None of them were his fault. He's playing. He's the last one playing when they're out of tune, when they're forgetting the words, when they're singing a different song than the other bandmates. Ringo really, I think, his reputation really grows.
I'm with Alfredo in terms of what he doesn't say word-wise. Watch his eyes, because I do think he's reading the room very correctly. And again, I think he's the guy that's getting the most joy out of that month as opposed to the others.
I think he's very curious what his future is going to hold, because the reason they had to finish by the end of January is because he was going to film the Magic Christian movie. And we see Peter Sellers come on. And it's a bit awkward at that point because Peter Sellers is having his own drug and personal issues at this point in time. And he comes in, he sits down, there's those awkward couple moments, and then Peter Sellers says, all right, I'm going to be here with the Beatles. I'm getting out of here. You know,
I would imagine that, yeah, because they were making Magic Christian, that's why maybe it was a good idea to put Sellers in. I guess drugs might have been possible as well, but also as we learn more about Sellers after he's passed, that he was a complicated, quiet man, and there really was no agenda. And maybe if it was, hey, screw around with the Beatles or whatever, but he really was like, all right, what are we talking about? Well, we don't know. All right, listen, I got to get going.
He was bored so quickly. That's a very good way of putting it. He was a very complicated man.
Yeah.
At the end of the movie, one of the things that I thought Peter Jackson did wonderfully was identify who everyone was. If you don't know, who the Derek Taylor is, or Dick James, or some of these people who weren't, familiar faces. At the end of the movie, after the Rooftop, they did that whole day where they recorded Long and Winding Road, and that's when they did Two of Us, and that's when they did Let It Be. I didn't care for how that was, the credits were rolling over that. It seems like throughout the whole movie, all three parts, we got to see so much of them stuttering and starting and stopping, and Alan Parsons is another one who...
Yeah, he's another guy that was milling around.
But by the time that we actually got to the full performances, that's something we should have seen. I also don't think Peter Jackson really explained what happened to these tapes ultimately. And what it was is Glenn Johns, he put together his Get Back version, and they rejected it. He did another one. They rejected that as well.
Oh, yeah.
And then they gave the tapes to Phil Spector, which is ultimately what became of the Let It Be album, which is where the Long and Winding Road and Let It Be and Across the Universe have the strings, and that's where he edits I Me Mine, and that's where he edits Dig a Pony, and that's where Phil Spector put his stamp on it, changing everything from what they originally thought. Because however they were going to come up with the album, one of the things that they were going to be strict about was they weren't going to add overdubs. They weren't going to have session musicians on it. And when he changed the rules, they were pretty bothered by that. That being said, Phil Spector certainly lifted up the album in the end. Some of these songs are a little bit better than they could have been. You could say the same about Billy Preston. He certainly lifts up I've Got a Feeling, and his work on Get Back is just remarkable.
Yes. No, I agree with you, man. Absolutely. And Dave, for my audio audience, my buddy Dave just pointed out, produced by George Martin, overproduced by Phil Spector. I'm kind of with you, Professor. I do think there are times where Spector's influence absolutely helped. And it's interesting. I wonder if they will release a combination of what Jackson presents in the documentary alongside the original cut. I know there is already an album out there of Let It Be that is a 50th anniversary commemorative disc. And, I haven't listened to it. Does it have alternate takes and outtakes along with?
They have a bunch of them. A lot of them are what the full versions are of the songs. Because most of the songs that we see in the movie, if we see 10 seconds of them performing a recognizable song, it's because there's only 10 seconds of them performing a recognizable song. It's not like they're just taking a bit of it and the rest of the song goes on. There's the Let It Be Naked release. I believe that came out in the early 2000s, which is produced but not overproduced. It doesn't have the strings. It doesn't have the background choirs and things like that. The new release has some of those, as well as the Glenn Johns initial release. So there's new stuff to be had, but ultimately it's all piled together just as the Let It Be album was.
Understood. Yeah.
I think Phil Spector should have left Long and Winding Road alone, and instead of having the strings on it, they could have had the keyboard solo, which should have stuck. Yet I think that he does a fantastic job on Let It Be and Across the Universe. I think he certainly earns his keep on that.
I'm with you on it, especially Across the Universe. That is one of my favorite late Beatles songs. So no, I'm with you.
That's actually my number one favorite Beatles song.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's excellent. Sure, man. No, that's cool.
There's several different versions of it, and the Let It Be version is sped up and slowed down, and things are added. But all three of the official versions are just quite remarkable. Yeah,
it's funny. Going back to the complete Beatles anthology. Excuse me. First of all, shame on ABC for giving us the truncated 2 nights of 2 hours, and especially if you have either the VHS or the DVDs, to know that the 3 living Beatles got together in a very casual way. Paul and George on ukuleles, Ringo beating out on his lap a beat, and then also them playing a couple instrumentals with full guitars and drum set. And it's like, you've got the living Beatles' last live performances. We didn't know at the time that it was going to be the last, but still, the first time they performed together in 25 years, and you don't show it? What are you thinking, network? Good Lord.
I always wondered about that myself. There's Jeff Lynne, who produced those, got to play with the 3 living Beatles in 95. And I think that must have been just a remarkable experience for him, growing up, loving the Beatles, learning how to play their stuff, and then getting to be the 4th guy in the band at one point. That's pretty remarkable.
And I'll tell you, I have mixed feelings about Jeff Lynne's production of, especially Free as a Bird is a weird song to me.
Free as a Bird sounds like a Wilbury song.
It does. And also
Real Love sounds like a Beatles song.
Well, I would have honestly, for the second song, rather than have the Beatles play along with what John laid down, the Lennon box set that has the stripped down Real Love, to me, is infinitely better than what they tried to do. It just sounds intrusive to me. As much as it is the Beatles doing parts for the song, I'm not a big fan. And also just the weirdness. And maybe in mid-90s technology wasn't up to snuff the way it is today. But really, like, whatever. I mean, it's like poor John is, I know it was a cassette, but it sounds like John's like doing a Rudy Valley 1920s thing, singing through a megaphone or something like that. And it just sounds weird.
I like that they just did 2 songs.
I agree with that.
They had a lot of demos. They could have done a bunch of stuff.
You're right.
And I like that they just said, just this. This is all we need.
No, I'm with you. Yeah. Yeah.
The problem that the Beatles are getting to now, and actually it's been a bit of a problem for a while, is we've hit the bottom of the barrel now. There's not much more new stuff that hasn't been heard that we can get to. And I think anything that is still unreleased, there's a reason for it. There's the Carnival of Lights, I think it's called, is a 15-minute instrumental from the Sgt. Pepper era, which I think is just 15 minutes of noise.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think that's like the only thing left now that they could put out. My bootlegs are completely devalued.
I understand, man. Absolutely. What were those original tapes of the Studio Chatter? Was it the Liberty Sessions? I forget what it was called.
There's a whole bunch of different ones. The one is called the Nagra reels. The camera that they used was Nagra. So a lot of them were taped and the audio comes from the film. A lot of it was also recorded from reel to reel. All of it has been out in some fashion or another. The same with the video. There's a lot of silent video that they were able to match up to that as best they could.
Yeah. Now, again, a friend of mine was pointing out that he felt there were a couple scenes where they're showing video footage and audio that isn't really from the video they're showing, and he felt that was kind of manipulative. And again, I personally didn't notice watching the 8 hours and everything. I don't know how you felt about that.
I did notice a couple of that, but there's also, if say one cameraman is filming and the end of the reel comes, he has to take the reel off the camera, put in a new one, and get it going. So that's whatever, 10, 20, 30 seconds.
Sure.
That there's nothing. I think that, and the fact that at the very beginning, Peter Jackson said we had to make editorial choices based on that. It seems like they were pretty good about getting them for that day. You know, if John was
Yeah.
wearing the green shirt, at least they had that. There's only so much they could do to stitch all this back together. And, you know, with the technology and the care that Peter Jackson put into it, I think they did a fantastic job at it.
Now, you've got your 2 textbooks, and I know you were doing Breakfast with the Beatle reports here in Chicago on XRT, and they sometimes play your old features as well. It seemed to me, looking on SoundCloud, that you did have a podcast for a while. Do you currently have a podcast that you do in addition to your live presentations?
What I do now, or at least I did quite a bit before the pandemic hit, was I would go to libraries and teach classes, and they would be either about the White Album or about Abbey Road or, you know, one specific topic. I've done a few of them over Zoom, and I used to share them on SoundCloud here and there, but there's also some legalities with that in terms of doing it on
that includes audio of the Beatles. Sure. In fact, I'll be honest, man, I'm not showing any for my audio audience. I'm not showing any images on a Word Balloon Live like I normally do, just because I'm afraid of any copyright infringement.
Cease and desist there, yeah. The Beatles people know how to stop stuff like that. I also have a Patreon that each week I give a quick lesson and share audio with it as well. If you go to the Facebook page, you can click around and
that's great
as well. Yeah,
that's good to hear, man. All right, very cool.
Hopefully in the new year, I'll be doing more library classes, because as nice as they are to do over Zoom, it is nice to be able to do them 4 feet away from where my bed is. It is really nice to be able to see people's reaction when you play something and you see someone smile because, you know, we play a clip from Help and, you know, there's a funny scene and, you know, stuff like that. I hope to get back to that sooner than later.
Is Help your favorite of the Beatles movies?
Absolutely. There's so much fun in the Help movie. Back to Mal Evans. I think the next documentary should be the Mal Evans documentary, because he was there from the beginning and he never left. He's credited in the All Things Must Pass album with Tea and Sympathy. He plays the tambourine while wearing a suit when John Lennon's on Top of the Pops, while Yoko crochets blindfolded on stage. He plays the alarm clock in A Day in the Life.
Yes.
And in the Help movie, he's swimming and they're in the ice when they're curling, and he pops up and he says, yeah, White Cliffs of Dover, and they point, and that's him. He just has so many of these super cool things, and very few people know who he is. That's one that even hardcore people are, who's this guy? You know?
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
A real interesting guy.
I lean more towards Hard Day's Night for my favorite film, but I will say about Help, I really think Help led me to my career in broadcasting, because when they play You're Gonna Lose That Girl in the studio, and just all those shots of them in front of the microphones, and you see the guys in the booth, that clicked in my pre-12-year-old brain. And I'm just like, I want to do a job like that, where I would love to be sitting, I don't need to perform. I knew I wasn't a musician, but I want to be, you know, making an album with musicians. And that really got me excited about studio work. And and in fact, to this day, I will go back and just even specifically from Help play You're Gonna Lose That Girl, because it's such an amazing scene. I love
that had an effect on me as well, but it was a little bit more adverse, because I probably started smoking as a teen because Ringo looked so cool when he's drumming with that cigarette in his mouth and the smoke's going there. Of all the, everyone seems to talk about this one's better than this one's better than that. Everyone seems to have a ranking. And this kind of brings us back before about just enjoying the Beatle music, just sitting back, relaxing, instead of trying to remember every detail and pick apart every little fact. It's fun to just enjoy it.
Oh, I agree. But I mean, I won't deny. I mean, like my favorite album, and I will be interested what yours is. My favorite album is Rubber Soul.
I'm a Rubber Soul guy as well. Next question, US or UK?
That is a very good question. I believe, God, tell me the song differences because it's been a while.
US version starts with I've Just Seen a Face.
Okay.
And it has It's Only Love. Whereas the UK version has Drive My Car, and some of the more electric stuff.
Okay, well,
So the US version is just a little bit more acoustic, a little bit more laid back.
And truly, thank God for YouTube, because there are so many great YouTube videos, and I'm sure you do it in your own presentations as well. But I do love learning the differences between the UK versions, and also the expanded albums that the US, Something New, and I
Beatles
can't.
6, Beatles 65. The
Yes.
US was much better at making money.
Yes.
Over it. They had a much better idea that this is a huge band. We can make a lot of dough over this. We better keep it up. We better try to make as much money as we can, because they're probably not going to be popular for very long. That was their way of thinking.
Sure. No, and again, I mean, you get it. I understand. It's funny also regarding the Beatles anthology, especially the CD versions. I listened to what they presented to Decca before signing with EMI, and I got to be honest, it's not that good.
It's interesting because we've never heard it before. But if you're listening to 10 other bands do something similar, it's probably not as cool.
Yeah.
That being said, that's the Pete Best difference. Because when you hear the Star Club recordings, which were from December of 1962 with Ringo, even though it's extremely frustrating because there's, they're poorly recorded on bad equipment in a room that's not very
conducive,
conducive to recording good records, you could hear just how remarkable the four of them are together.
Do you have I remember in the 90s they released the movie Backbeat, which kind of really focused on the Hamburg years. I'm a big fan prior to that of a 70s movie that Dick Clark produced called Birth of the Beatles. And maybe because I saw it first, I prefer that movie to Backbeat. I have to be honest.
See, the one that I like is I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Oh, that's a great movie.
Because
sure.
It's just so silly and so sweet and so lighthearted. I love the part when the girl is hiding under the bed and we see them come in and we see their boots. I love that they're so close to the Beatles without actually meeting the Beatles.
I'm with you. Absolutely. I love when the maid is in the hotel and she's shaking out a mop and they think it's one of the Beatles shaking their head and the crowd just screams. I love that.
That's so fantastic. Much fun. The movie from a few years ago, Yesterday.
Oh, Yesterday's great.
That was also very good. It was a very sweet romantic comedy. It was very well done. The music was, fantastic. You will not hear me say this very often, but I thought Ed Sheeran was great in that.
Very funny.
Actually,
very funny.
That's the only time you'll hear me say that about Ed Sheeran. But I like that he was a good sport in the movie, that he was funny, and he played a character of himself. It's just remarkable how many Beatle-related things there have been that have been, very positive and have lasted throughout the years. It's a shame that there will never be another thing quite so special.
It's a different time, and again, we're a segmented audience that gets catered to in very narrow ways, rather than the general way that multimedia was back in the 60s through the those 10 years of the Beatles and everything. And it is what it is. And yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think circumstances will allow for it. And in fact, I think Yesterday points to that in a lot of ways. And I love the actors or the characters' parents. Oh, he's playing us a new song. It's called Leave It Be. No, let it be. Yes, excuse me. It's just adorable. And also Ed Sheeran with, instead of Hey Jude, Hey Dude. Do you ever think
Hey Dude? Yes. Yes.
No, it's adorable. Absolutely, man. And also, isn't it interesting? I'm sure this popped up on your radar as well. Rolling Stone did a list of the top 10 important, they said, rock artists. And the Beatles as a band was number one. And it was so interesting on Twitter to read younger people like, the Beatles, they're overrated. And, they're, sorry, I don't agree. And it's like, that's fine. Everyone's got their own opinion. There is a reason why these people have lasted for 60 years. I mean, come on.
It seems like with, oh God, I hate to say, the kids these days, when I'm talking about the people who are 25 and under, they don't remember a time where any of the solo Beatles were especially a big deal. Their whole life, they've been oldies. Similar to that would be like like a guy like B.B. King. When I was growing up, he was past his prime. He was the oldies circuit. He was still very good, but it was kind of hard to put into context just how cool he was.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. Elaine has a comment. I also enjoy looking back to what I was doing when I first heard the Beatles. I was just 17 when they first came out. I know what you mean, Elaine. Absolutely. Forgive the pun. But yeah, absolutely, man. And also, Professor, you've worked with Terry Hemmert here in Chicago, the host of Breakfast with the Beatles, and I think another person that was, just a teenager when they were breaking through. And Terry's the right person to host it here locally in Chicago, Breakfast with the Beatles. Are they? Do you know? Are they Beatles Fest, as it was again pre-pandemic, a yearly thing? Are they planning for a 2022 convention?
Yeah, I think it's much too early for anyone to be able to make decisions yet.
Sure.
Because even last year it was, June before they officially decided.
Well, and also, thank God they made this now. Although, again, they really did focus on 1969. But there's there aren't that many people left that can still tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in previous years, some of the people that have been at Beatles Fest that have since passed away. Again, when we're dealing with 50 years ago and stuff, it's kind of a crapshoot of who's left to tell the stories that was there and tell them accurately.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, as always, I will be curious to see what is next for the Beatles, because it's never going to be the end. There's always going to be another release. There's going to be another anniversary coming up. There's going to be newer footage and so on.
Julie says the Chicago Beatle Fest is scheduled for next August, the 12th through the 14th. Fingers crossed. Absolutely, Julie. Again, even from a comic book convention standpoint, we all kind of hold our breath, and certainly with the new variant that is starting to sweep the globe. We'll see if that impacts the U.S. Hopefully not, and hopefully we get more normal again. And Professor, I hope you get back to live presentations next year at libraries, because you're a font of information as always, and I think that's great. The Beatles textbooks, is that the correct title for your book?
Textbook Beatles,
Textbook Beatles
1 and 2. You can go to ProfessorMoptop.com, or you could go to Amazon and find it from there, and or you can go to the Facebook page and contact me directly. I'll give you all the details you need.
That's great, man. Hey, I really appreciate you joining me. I hope we find a reason to do this again if there is a new
the Booster Gold movie. I'm telling you, when
there you go, man. Absolutely,
I'll be back.
You've proven your comic book cred, so yes, please come back. It would be great to talk books with you sometime. So, no, thanks a lot, man. And again, ProfessorMoptop.com. Follow him on Facebook to get more information, and Textbook Beatles, volumes 1 and 2. Oh, there we go. Laura says you've got, and shame on me for not mentioning this. Let's get this in there. You've got a John Lennon class happening December 7th. Where is this?
That's going to be from the Northbrook Library, and it's on Zoom. If you go to the Facebook page, you could click around there. You might want to wait a day or two because they were having computer troubles today.
Oh.
So hopefully they'll get it together. But one way or another, by December 7th, which is next week, we'll be able to share all the links you can. And again, if you go to Facebook, you can get in touch with me.
That's awesome, man. Well, keep up the great work. I'm glad people like you are out there spreading the gospel and reminding people about the greatest rock band ever. And this has been a pleasure. Everybody, thanks for watching. We'll have more Word Balloon Live later this week. And until then, everybody, stay